Our goal is to start Daf Yud Beis, but we have to start with Yud Aleph Amid Beis as a segue into the sugya. So we're going to look at Amar Abchia Bar Abba, and we'll count up from the bottom of Yud Aleph Amid Beis. It's the first of the wide lines on Yud Aleph Amid Beis. Amar Abchia Bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan boy. So Rabbi Chia reports that Rabbi Yochanan had the following suffix: Hamachzir grushaso mishenises. So let's say Reuven divorced his wife and she got married to someone else. Her second husband died or gave her a get, and her original husband remarried her, which is a violation of a lav doraisa. Because the Torah says, Lo yuchal vayla loshuv lekachta, he cannot remarry her after she had a marriage relationship with someone else. He went ahead and married her a second time, and we're going according to the Shita of the Chachamim that Kiddushin Tovsin B'chayve Lavin. So the Kiddushin and the Ishus is valid, even though it's illegitimate. And then he died. And now she falls for Yibum to his surviving brother. However, Yibum is not an option. And the logic is a kal v'chomer. If the Torah objects to the marriage to Reuven, the late Reuven, then how much more so the Torah is not going to be in favor of a new marriage to Shimon, because the marriage of Shimon is meant to be, in a sense, a continuation of the marriage to Reuven, but Reuven's marriage was illegitimate. But on the other hand, she'll need chalitza. And the reason she needs chalitza is because since the Isha's relationship to Reuven is valid, is recognized by the Torah, by the Jewish law, therefore there's a zikas yibum, and that zikas yibum has to be removed through chalitza. Now, Reuven was remarried his original divorcee wife. He was also married to another woman. And with his death, both of these ladies fall for Yibum to Mukom Shimon. And now Rabbi Yochanan vacillates. What's the status of the second woman? So let's call it Rachel and Leah. But again, they're not sisters. So Reuven was married to Rachel. He was married to a Nachris by the name of Leah. When Reuven dies, we know that Rachel is choletzes v'eina misyabemes. What's the status of Leah? And on this question, Rabbi Yochanan vacillates. Does Leah fall for Yibum? Because she's not a tzaras erva, because the status of Rachel is not an erva. The status of Rachel is what we call chayve lavin. And Rabbi Yochanan is not sure what is the status of a tzara of chayve lavin. The tzara of an erva has the same exact status as an erva. And just like the erva doesn't fall for Yibum or chalitza, the tzaras erva doesn't fall for Yibum or chalitza. But in the case of chayve lavin, the Torah is objecting to the Yibum for Rachel because of that kal v'chomer that we mentioned earlier. But that doesn't have any implication as far as Leah is concerned, and it's possible that the Torah would advocate in favor of Yibum such that Shimon could be miyabim Leah. Amalei Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami doesn't understand why Rabbi Yochanan is absolutely certain that Rachel doesn't fall for Yibum. Even though Rachel is a machzer gushasel situation, tiboylach hi gufa. Perhaps this grusha herself should fall for Yibum. And although, as far as Reuven is concerned, the late brother, it was a violation of an Isser machzer gushasel yachash and nises, but that doesn't have any implication as far as the Yavam is concerned. She is in no way asura to the Yavam. So you're asking about the tzara, namely Leah. Why don't you ask about Rachel herself? So the Gemara says, "He gufa loka mi boile." I never vacillated whatsoever, and have no doubts about Rachel. The Amrin and Kal V'chomer. We have a Kal V'chomer to exclude Rachel from Yibum. The mutar law asura, be asura lo kolshke. As far as the Baal is concerned, the original husband, namely Reuven, is concerned, she's asura. And the Yavam, for sure, is asula. Lo kolshkein sheti asula. In other words, if during the lifetime of Reuven, he's not allowed to have any intimacy, any relationship with his grusha, liachash and nises, then how could we possibly think that Ishus, that Zika, could fall onto Shimon, and Shimon would be allowed to be miyabi, to have an intimacy? His brother, who projects this woman in Yibum and Zika, could not be allowed to have intimacy. He's going to be allowed to have intimacy? But Kikami Boyle says, Rabbi Yochanan, my vacillation was about Tarasa. My Mi Olim Kalvachomer Lemidche Tzara. Does this Kalvachomer have any bearing? Can we extend it even to the tzara? Oh, no. It's enough. The Kavachomer is enough to generate an Isser from the Yevamot herself, meaning Rachel herself, onto Shimon, but not as far as the tzara, as far as Leah is concerned. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Masni Hoch. He had a slightly different version of this back and forth. And he had it, Omer Rab Chia Bar Abba Boy Rab Yochanan Machzik Mishasim Mishanisei Smau. What about she herself? Can she herself, Rachel herself, who is the grusha of Reuven, and he remarried her illegally, can she fall for Yibum to Shimon? Amalei Rabbi Ami, B'tibaylach Tzarasa. What's the status of Leah, the other wife of Reuven? Apparently, Rabbi Yochanan in this version was only vacillating about the status of Rachel. Amalo, Rabbi Yochanan says to him, Tzarasa lo kami boile. Certainly, I know that the Tzara, Leah, needs or could be subject to Yibum. The Kavachomer has no impact on the Tzara. My suffix is he gufa mai. Does this Kavachomer have the power to undermine a mitzvah of Yibum? Although maybe the Kavachomer is not strong enough to reject the possibility of Yibum, because again, there is Ishus to Reuven. Reuven died without children, and therefore there still is a mitzvah of Yibum. And here we turn to Daf Yud Beis. Amal Leis, Rav Ami responds to Rabbi Yochanan Tanisua. This status of a grusha and hatzara can be derived from a Mishnah later on. The Mishnah talks about a case of a man who's married to two wives. He dies without children. And the halacha is that if he's miyabim one of these two wives, the yavam, or he gives chalitza to one of these two wives, then he patters up the tzara. Hoisa achas ksheira v'achas psula. If, as far as the yavam is concerned, one of these two wives of the late Reuven is psula, the other is ksheira, and we'll see what that means in just a minute. Then im haya choletz, if he decides, this yavam Shimon, to go through with chalitza and he's not interested in yibum, then choletz the psula. He should give the chalitza to the psula. Im haya miyabim, then miyabim l'ksheira. So Rav Ami asks the following question: how do we understand the Mishnah? My ksheira umay psula. Ilema ksheira ksheira li alma. Upsula psula lialma. If we're talking about a case of a woman who's kshera, right? She's allowed to marry a Kohen. She's what's called a miucheses. And the psula is a grusha or a chalutza from an earlier marriage, a previous marriage, who's not allowed to marry a Kohen. So if that's the pshat, the Yavam himself is not a Kohen. What difference does it make if she's psula lakuna or not? Kevan dilididei chazia, he's not a Kohen. So why do you call it psula? He's allowed to marry a psula. A Kohen is allowed to marry a grusha. My nafkele mina, why do you say that he should give chalitza to the psula? What do you mean chalitza to the psula? There is no psula. Elalav, kshera kshera lei. The phrase of kshera as opposed to psula is relative to Ruvain, not to Shimon the Yovam, but to Ruvain, the original Baal of Rachel. And psula lei to the Baal Mainiu. What would be a case where Rachel is psula to the original husband, to Ruvain, the late Ruvain? Machzir Gushasa. In a case where he divorced his wife, Rachel, she married someone else, and then after Gerushin, etc., he remarried. But Ktani, if this is what psula means, it says Imoyim Yabim L'Kshera, which means that he can choose he has to make one particular choice from the two wives of Ruvain, meaning Rachel and Leah. He has to choose Leah because she's the Kshera. And Rachel is the Psula because she's a Machzir Gushaso vis-a-vis the deceased. And now we have a clear-cut proof from the Mishnah, argues Rav Ami, that the tzara falls for Yibum. The tzara of a Machzir Gushaso, in fact, falls for Yibum. Well, the Gemara deflects it. We're going to assume that perhaps as far as Shimon the Yovam is concerned, both of these girls, both these women, Rachel and Leah Amutaras, Kshera, Li Alma, Psula, Li Alma. So Kshera means that she can marry a Kohen. She's miucheses. She was never divorced. And Psula means she cannot marry a Kohen. She's enjoined from Kahuna. Udekamar came to the Chazi Mainafkele Mina. Since he's not a Kohen, what difference does it make whether she is Psula Lakuna, Kshera Lakuna? The answer is Mishum de Rav Yosef. The Omer Rav Yosef Khan Shana Rebbe. Rebbe had a kind of a paraphrase, an idiomatic phrase, and Rebbe had in mind this particular scenario. What was his phrase? Lo yishpoch adam mei beiro. If a man is cleaning out his bar of water that's putrid, he should not pour it into a bar that acherim tzrichim lem. If others can drink from the following bar, then he shouldn't dump his wastewater. In England, they call it the rubbish, right? He shouldn't be pouring that into the bar that someone else could drink from. In other words, a Jew is sensitive to the needs of others. And therefore, when this individual, the Yavam, wants to be motzi, he wants to reject the wives of his late brother by giving chalitza, he should be sensitive to the needs of these two women and make the right choice, says Rav Yosef. If one of these two women is already psula l'kahuna, namely she had been married and divorced from a previous marriage before Reuven came onto the scene, she's the one that you should give chalitza to. But the other woman, the tzara, who was never married and she was therefore kshera l'kahuna, don't give a chalitza. If you choose to give chalitza to that, you have a choice of the two wives. Choose bimata the kaf in that direction because it's already May bar, it's already bad water anyway. No, she's already psula kuna. On the other hand, if he comes to be biyabem, if that's his decision, is then he could choose either one of them. That's not a problem. Okay. So now the Gemara is going to quote a different proof to try to resolve the suffix of Rabbi Yochanan. Toshma, hamachzir grushaso bishenises. A man remarries his ex after she married someone else, and he dies without any children. He vitzarasa choletzes. Now, if you read this brisa literally, it makes no sense. What do you mean, he vitzarasa choletzes? We have a rule in chalitza that one chalitza suffices to pater up all the Yevamots. No matter how many wives Reuven left, one chalitza to one of the wives is enough to remove the zika and allow the other wives, the other tsaros, to get remarried. So what do you mean, he vitzarasa choletzes? That's a contradiction, minei ubei. He vitzarasa salkedaita? How could you interpret this brisa? And the Gemara answers, Ella Amo, we're going to revamp the brisa to read as follows. Ohi, o tzarasa. And we're talking about explicitly a case of machzir grushaso mishenises. And there are two possible chalitzos. Either he gives chalitza to the grusha or to hatzara, either to Rachel or to Leah. So we see clearly here that Yibum is out of the question. He is compelled to give chalitza. He could choose either one of them to give chalitza. Why doesn't the brisa offer him an option of being the yabem, the tzara of a machzir gushasa? Apparently, the tzara of machzir gushasa is asura b'yibum, and the only possibility is chalitza. And in the context of chalitza, it doesn't matter which one of the two he gives chalitza to, and therefore it says he v'tzarasa, meaning oh he o tzarasa choletzes. So we now have a proof from a brisa that the tzara of machzir gushaso eino misyabemis asura liib, and the Gemara rejects it. V'chilav terutzi komentartzele. You've already admitted to me that this brisa fits into a category of what's called a brisa mishubeshes. It's not a reliable brisa. The transmission here is not reliable because you yourself told me that we can't take this literally and say he vitzarasa choletzes. No. It's he otzarasa. It's tritz hachi. Once you're already revamping the brisa and you have no choice but to do so, is read the brisa in the following way: he choletzes vitzarasa o choletzes o misyabemes. The grusha self has only one option, and that's chalitza. Yibum is out of the question because of the kal v'chomer. As far as the tzar is concerned, he has two options: either chalitza or yibum. So now we're coming to the conclusion that it's possible to defend the position that the tzaras machzir gushaso muteres b'yibum, and that's a viable possibility. Okay, now we get to the sugya called mima enes. So we're talking about the following. Oh, a girl who's a ketana can only be married off by her father on a doraisa level. If her father is not there, he's gone, then either her mother or one of her brothers, or maybe a consent of all the brothers, they can give her over as a marriage partner to so-and-so. That's a kedushin dirabanan, ishus dirabanan, and she has the possibility of yivu. And I'm sorry, of miyun, I meant to say. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Now, there's kiddushay miyun of a ketana shisiua achia o ima, and now after this marriage takes place, the husband dies childless. So the Gemara later on has a machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel about whether there is nefila for yibu. According to Beit Shammai, once her husband dies, then she falls for Yibum. Again, all this Yibum is only D'Rabbanan, but D'Rabbanan she falls for Yibum. And Beis Hillel say, no, there's no Yibum. Why? Because just like the Ketana herself could be Memayin on the original husband who's no longer alive, she could also be Memayin on this Yavam and say, I'm not interested. Now, it's interesting because the Ritva says, and apparently before him, the Ramban already says, that if the Yevama is Mima'enes in the Yavam, then Lemafreya, it undermines and removes the original marriage relationship to the late brother, which is a fantastic idea, that Miyun of a Yevama removes the Ishus Lemafreya of the late brother.
But she's still a Ketana. She's still a Ketana
She's
now
still a Ketana.
When the Yibum situation
Yeah. Now,
comes up.
if let's say she matured and she became a
Right.
let's call it a Nara, then as soon as the husband has an act of intimacy with her, that creates Kedushay Torah. So we're talking now. You might talk about a little bit of a gray area. Let's say she became a Nara, but they haven't yet consummated the marriage. Whether or not there's a possibility of Yibum, of Miyun. I keep saying Yibum, I mean Miyun. In any event, as a result of the Miyun of this Ketana in the Yavam, the original Zika for Yibum is completely undermined. However, the Rabbanan said that she's not allowed to be married to any of the brothers because that's considered Eishes Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah. Now, we're up to the main part of our discussion, the Machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Reuven dies and he leaves behind him a number of brothers. And she, his wife, who's a Ketana, was Mima'enes in one of the brothers. Rav says that as a result of that miyun, she cannot marry any of the brothers. And this is similar to a case of a get. Let's say if a Yavam gives a get to the Yevama, then Midrabanan, she can no longer have Yibum with any of the brothers. The get is upgraded to a quasi-chalitza status. And according to Rav, the same din applies to Miyun. Miyun is like a get. It's like chalitza Midrabanan, and therefore none of the brothers are allowed to marry. Shmuel says no. She was Mama'enes in one particular Yavam, but she's interested in one of his brothers, one of the other Yavamim, and she's allowed to have Yibum, or I shouldn't call it Yibum, but she's allowed to be married to any of the other brothers. And according to Shmuel, Mama'enes is not the same as a Balas Get. In the case of Get, the Yavam does a Maisa Gerushin. In the case of Miyun, she just walks out of the marriage, says, I'm not interested. B'cha Eini Rotza, I'm not interested in you, but I'm interested in one of the brothers. So that Miyun only removes the Zika, but it doesn't in any way engender an Iser of Eishes Ach vis-a-vis the other brothers. On the contrary, the Miyun of that Yavam undermines the entire Zika, and therefore there's no Eishes Ach. Basically, we're saying that she was never married to Reuven. Omar Ablili Bar Memel. I never remember this name. Omar Mar Ukvam Shmuel. If the if the late Reuven had another wife in addition to the Ketana, and now she, the Ketana, does Miyun in the Yavam, so Rasa Mima'enes Asura. The Tzara of the Mima'enes, so let's say the Mima'enes is a Ketana by the name of Rachel, and Reuven, the late Reuven, was married not only to Rachel, but also to Leah. And now there are two brothers that survived Reuven. Okay, he changes. It's interesting. In the Masechet, he has, a scenario with names. Sometimes it's confusing because I come up with different names. But let's go with his names. He says the following: Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Shimon marries Sarah, and she's the Yesoma Ketana. So that's Kedushay Miyun. Shimon is also married to Rivka. Shimon dies without children. His wives, Sarah, who is a Ketana, and Rivka fall for Yibum to Reuven. Sarah is Mama Enes with Reuven. She's Mama Enes with the Yevamot, which means that she undermines and removes L'mafreya retroactively the marriage between Sarah and Shimon. Sarah is Asura LeReuven and Oseres Games Rivka Tarasa. Now, offhand, that's very strange because once there was a miyun of Sarah, so in effect, Sarah never fell for Yibum at all because that miyun is oker, the Kedusha L'mafreya of the late Shimon. So Shimon's wife, Rivka, should now be Misyabemes. Why does the Mima'enes generate an Iser Yibum vis-a-vis Rivka Hatzara? So Gemara analyzes this. Leman. The Tzara of the Ma'enes is Asura to whom? Lema, if it's La'achim, if it's the brothers of the Yavam, right? We said the Yavam was Reuven. Maybe Reuven has other brothers. That's impossible. Hashlehi Gufa Sharia. Even the Ma'enes herself is allowed to marry the other brothers, right? That's what we said was the sheet of Shmuel. That miyun is not like get that apostles her to the other brothers. Tiyama Shmuel mina bezeh muteres bezeh. It's tarasa mi boy. If the brothers are allowed to marry Rachel L'Ktana, the Bas Miyun, then certainly they could marry Rivka Hatzara. Ella, by process of elimination, we have no choice to assume that Shmuel was answering the Tzara of the Ma'enes Lididei, only to the Yavam himself, which is a little bit strange too, because the Miyun is Oker, the Zika L'mafreya. So why? So let's say it this way. I think it's a better way of saying, since the miyun is oker, the whatchamacallit, the zika l'mafreya, so there was no zika to be mata the iser eishes ach. So the Gemara says, u'maishna mima'enes desharyali achim. What's the logical consistency here? You're saying that the other Achim are allowed to marry the Ma'enes, and you're saying the lo of the Behu Maisa, because she never was Ma'enes vis-a-vis the other brothers, is Tzara Nami, her Tzara also, again, as far as the Yavam who was subject to the Miyun, lo of the Bay Maisa. She didn't do a miyun to the tzara. There was no miyun of the tzara. The other woman was Mima'enes. That's Rachel, but not Leah. So why do you say that according to Shmuel, as far as the Yom is concerned, we're not going to allow him after he receives miyun to be miyabim the tzara. Why is that so? And the Gemara answers, Gzeira mishum tzaras bito mima'enes. Okay, for this we have to set up a little bit of a diagram. So we have Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Reuven has a daughter who's a ketana. We'll call her Sarah. Reuven marries off Sarah, his daughter, to Yitzchak. At that moment in time, when Reuven marries off Sarah, his daughter, she leaves his rishus. Now Yitzchak went ahead and he divorced Sarah. And Shimon now marries Sarah b'nesue ktana d'Rabbanan. Shimon has another wife whose name is Rivka. Shimon dies without children. Sarah falls for Yibum to her own father, together with Rivka Hatzar. And now Sarah is Mema'enes Bi'aviyah. Very strange kind of case of miyun to one's father. Right, Shimon was the one who married her and then died without children. She fell for yibum to her own father, Reuven. Which means that Rivka Hatzara is not a Tzaras Erva because there was never a marriage relationship to Shimon. So therefore, Rivka is Muteris B'Yibum. Ach mikol makom kevet shelo mi'ana Sarah b'bayla Shimon b'chayav. Since Sarah was not a Mema'enes while Shimon was alive, she only was Mema'enes in her father Reuven after Shimon died and she fell for Yibum. Nireis, it looks in the eyes of the spectator, Kimisha nafal l'fnei aviyah liyibum. Again, because she went through with miyun to her father, it looks like she fell for yibum to her father. Well, otherwise, why is she being mema'enes? Is therefore it looks like Rivka is hatzara. All this is what it looks like on the outside wrapping. Kitzaras bito. The asura l'ruve mirabon. The Gemara is going to get into this. So because of this particular scenario of bito, tzaras bito, and mema'enes, they made gzera and they prohibited all tzara mema'enes, all tzaras mema'enes, even if it's not bito. All because of this case of bito. And honestly, I don't know why this is not gzera l'gzera. That's a different question that has to be addressed. But that's what it says. So the Gemara asks the following question: V'tzaras bito mema'enes mi asira? Are you telling me that we have a gzera because of tzaras bito mema'enes, that one case, rare case of tzaras bito? But you're assuming, of course, that tzaras bito mema'enes is asura, mi asura. For Tanan, we have a Mishnah at the very beginning of the Masechta, and it says, "V'kulan im mesu o mianu tarasein mutaros." If the erva died during the lifetime of her husband, or she gave miyun, in the case of a ketana shisu avia achera, she was mema'enes in the late Reuven, we'll call him, it starts saying mutaros. There's no din of tzaras erva here because she was already out of the picture during the lifetime before the nefila for Yibum. So the Gemara tries to clarify. The miyana b'man, the case of miyana, to whom was she mema'enes? Elema the man of the Baal. If this woman gave miyun to the husband during his lifetime, so already at the time of his death, they were not tzara zulazu, hainu grusha. I mean, that's exactly identical to the case of grusha, that if the erva received the get during the lifetime of her husband, the late husband, then there's no din of tzaras erva. So why do you repeat the case of Mianu if you already have the case of Grusha? Elalav, therefore, by process of elimination, we assume that the Mishnah has in mind the Yavam, that the Miyun was a Miyun of the Yavam, and the Chiddush of the Mishnah is that even though at the time in the Fila they were tzara zulazu, but nevertheless, the tzara is not asura mishum tzaras erva, because the miyun of the yavam, of the Yevamot to the yavam, is oker the kedusha ames l'mafreya. So she was never ishes ames at all, never, and therefore they were never tzara zulazu. So we see that even bito mema enesbo, if she was mama enes liachar mos baila, after the death of her husband, ena oseres olav es tzarasa. V'kolshkein, and how much more so tzaras mima enes is muteres if it wasn't a case of bito. All this is against Shmuel. The where it says no, liolam the Baal, the miyun was on the Baal during his lifetime. The Mishnah says both Gerushin and miyun, and it seems like a repeat performance. That part of miyun is redundant. Trey Gavni Gerushin, the Mishnah is just giving you two subcategories of Gerush. The Gemara asks, Maishna ki miana bibal the akrina linisuin. If during the lifetime of the Baal, her miyun achieves the goal that it undermines the entire marriage relationship, such that now the tzara is muteres liyama, is dakrinu l'nisuin, if miyun during the lifetime of the late Ruvain was effective and could remove the nisuin, is kimiyana biyavam nami. The Gemara thinks that there's no reason why it should be different in the case of Miyana B'Yavam. If after he dies and she falls for Yivim to the Yavam, the surviving brother, that Miyun should be identical. And therefore the Tzara should be Muteres. The Miyun is Oker than Isuin. So then I'm going to add one word, Ella, but therefore we have no choice but to say that Nisuin Kamoi Ka'akri, that she, through her miyun, could undermine and invalidate the miyun, can undermine or invalidate Oker the miyun ze Ka'akra. And that would mean that the Zika is completely betela. Iglai Milsom afraid that she was never married to the late Ruvain, who's Ashes Achiv, and therefore the other Ashes Hames never was a tzara to this erva. So it doesn't make sense that even if the man died and the miyun took place posthumously, that she should be asura to the tzara. Tzara is not a tzaras erva because the miyun removes the marriage l'mafreya. Igloi milsa mafreya. She was never Ishes Achiv. So the Gemara answers, I agree that Miyun has the power to be Oker Kedusha L'Mafreya. As if to say this Erva was never married to the late Ruvain, and therefore the Torah was never Torah's Erva, but nevertheless, the Torah's Asura Mishum Maris Ayin. Tani Rami Bar Yechezkel, Miyano Bebal, Muterisli of. If she was Mamenes in the Baal, then she's allowed to marry her former ex-husband's father. A person is not allowed to marry his daughter-in-law, so by marrying her ex-husband, after me, ex-husband's father, that's a case of kaloso. But the answer is that the miyun is oker the kedusha l'mafreya. So she was never kaloso. The yavam, but if this katana was mema'enes in the yavam after the death of her husband, asurali of, she's not allowed to marry the father of her late husband. Alma, what do we see from this? That since the Nesuin of the son, of the Ben, generated a din of Yibum, is therefore Mishas Hanafila, when she fell for Yibum, before there was an Akiras Kedushin through Miyun, Nireis Kekalos. There was one moment in time when she appeared and it was presented to the world as if she was Kalosa. And again, even though subsequently the Miyun is Oker, the Kedusha Ben L'Mafreya, but it doesn't seem that way to Bnei Adam. They don't know that. They're not great scholars. They're going to mistakenly think that the Miyun is a Miyun on B'dika Zika, not on the original Kedusha. So the Gemara answers, Hachanami, this is the end of the answer. In the case of Taras Bito Mima'enes, even though the Miyun is Oker L'Mafreya, that she was never the Tzara, but let's look at Shas Nefila. Before there was an Akira of Kiddush Abbas through Miyun. That was the Shas Nefila. So it looks like she's at Tzaras Bito. Is nearest Kitzaras Bito. So if we're going to allow her for Yibum, people will come to the mistake and they'll think to be Matir Tzaras Abbas even without Miyun. So this leads us to Omar of Asi. Which is Tzaras Islands. This is a major sugya of Tzaras Islands, right? The Torah says, Asher Teled, in the Parsha of Yibum, it's got to be a woman who's capable of having children. An islandess is not capable of having children. But what's the status of the Tzara of an islandess? Is she like the Tzara of an Ereva? Because since the islandess doesn't fall for Yibum, she becomes Eishes Achid. And therefore the Tzara is the Tzara of an Erev of Eishes Achid. That's the sugya here of Rav Asi, which we'll leave for another time. Okay then?
Okay,
So let's